everyone, and welcome back to my channel TC&T, which is True Crime and Trials. And today I'm going to be covering the Mark Sievers trial, days 4, 5 and 6. Now I know my last video was 40 minutes long, but although this is 3 days, day 4 is the longest, and then days 5 and 6 they finished at 12, so there's not much to them, and the witnesses that were on there was nothing much to report on those, so I thought I'd do them all together again. So Sandra Hoskins was the first one, and she worked at the Sievers practice. She was the medical assistant. She'd worked there for over 7 years. She knew Mark was one of her bosses, and she was the one that tried to call Mark on that morning when Teresa hadn't turned into work, but she could only get hold of him by text. And she told him she couldn't get a hold of Teresa, so Mark texted Sandra back and said he couldn't either. And the only thing that Mark did, that she knew he did at the practice, was the billing. So that was that, nothing major. Then Detective Nick Schooneman, who works for the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, he was the crime scene detective, and he got involved in the investigation in July of 2015. He was the part of the team that executed the search warrant on Curtis Wright's home. And then they go through all the photographic evidence of outside his house, inside his house, the evidence that they got, all the stuff that was shown in the Rogers trial, really. He also searched the rental car and the Mark Sievers apartment that he had in Missouri. And he did Jimmy Ray Rogers' residence as well. They show evidence of the black backpack that Taylor Showmaker said that Jimmy had taken with him. They found that in Rogers' car. A lot of these photos were shown in the Rogers trial. The cooler box, and then showing evidence that was taken from the Rogers residence, like the sign that he brought back for Taylor, t-shirt, tennis shoes. It's all evidence that we've seen before, just the new pieces of photographic evidence. There was a few new ones. And of course the infamous blue jumpsuit that was found at the side of the road. The cross, yeah, I mean, his intent in discrediting any testimony that's been said, whether they be law enforcement or not. And, you know, certainly Curtis Wright and Taylor Showmaker. So he asked Nick a lot of questions that he didn't know the answers to, like when they went to find the blue jumpsuit that was found at the side of the road, and they found the front and back of a cell phone, and the defence attorney asked Nick if they fit the phone that was recovered. He didn't know. Did he know if the cell phone had a SIM card in it? No. He asks Nick to take out the black and green tennis shoes that were found at the Rogers residence, and asks him to step down to show the jury. And then he asks Nick if there is any blood on them that would be apparent to the naked eye. He couldn't see any. He didn't look inside the black backpack that was photographed either, which I found really odd, to be honest. I mean, you photographing something, surely you'd look inside it. I mean, there's a lot of things in this trial so far that makes me wonder why they didn't test things they should have tested. He said he knew there were things in the backpack, but he didn't know what they were. And the cell phone that he retrieved, he wrapped in aluminium foil because he didn't have a Faraday box, because the budget doesn't allow a ton of Faraday boxes to be carried around. Then Kim Van Was was called again, but nothing really different to tell you. And to be honest, I'm starting to think I'm starting to forget that this trial is about Mark and not about Rogers, because it's just like deja vu again, and it's boring, to be honest. And I'm hoping once it's the defence's turn that it kind of gets a bit more interesting and we hear a bit more. Then Gladys Martinez of Lee County Sheriff's Office. She was a crime scene tech in 2015, and she was the one at the autopsy. She examined Teresa's body with a DLS light, which is ALS light, not DLS, it's my writing, is that? Alternative light source, to look for the presence of any evidence that is sensitive to the light, such as blood or hair. There was some microscopic fibres found on Teresa's clothing, but there was nothing. I'm presuming that was blue fibres that were from the blue jumpsuit. Now the big one of the day. This was the last witness of day 4. David Lebid, Lee County Sheriff's Office. He was a sergeant and supervisor of this case. He monitored all aspects of the case. Everybody that was involved in the case, he oversaw everything. He spoke to Rose Gruner, or Grunard. She was the one that gave them the first tip in the case that led them to Wright and Rogers. And he says that Rogers seemed kind of frantic when he saw Lebid there, even though David hadn't told him why he was there. He was frantic, and he wouldn't give a sworn statement, and said he hadn't been to Florida. And again, there's a big thing about witnesses taking notes in, especially, you know, the ones from law enforcement. I mean, this trial was 2015. So being asked questions about a case that happened so long ago, they're not going to remember everything. So a lot of them bring in notes with them, but they're not allowed to just sit and look at the notes all the time. They've got to ask permission. Well, they've got to say, I can't remember. And then the attorney will say, well, would it help if you looked at your notes? So David was looking at his notes without even asking. So that brought up a problem, and there was a bit of tension between everyone then, especially the defence and David, because it was defence that brought it up. And then he talked about Curtis Wright's wife while he was at Curtis's residence, which I hadn't heard before. They hadn't really mentioned Angela. So that piqued my interest a bit. And David said that Angela seemed off to him, and he wasn't sure if she was being deceptive, but nothing. He didn't carry anything, didn't go any further with his feel, you know, his instinct. He just left that alone. But Curtis Wright was extremely concerned about his wife when he was arrested, and he made sure that law enforcement knew she had nothing to do with it. Which again, why they didn't question Angela more is another question for me. So there's a lot of questions that I've got up here that aren't getting answered, which is frustrating. Then he said a witness had said that Wright's wife had said that she was upset about Curtis being away when, you know, the weekend he was in Florida. Apparently, she'd spoke to a few of the witnesses, which frustrated David, but she wasn't under suspicion. He just wanted her to stop talking to witnesses. Again, and very weird. And there was something that was brought up that Lebed had tried to collect hair samples from Rogers while he was in the holding facility that they went to go see him at, but he refused, and the guards wouldn't enforce it, so that's why they didn't obtain hair samples from Rogers until September 2016. They had tried, but law enforcement, they had tried in the holding facility, but the guards didn't say, well, you've got to do it. The police officers, they've got, you know, paperwork here to say you've got to do it. They just had nothing to do with it. I hope that made sense. So yeah, right, the cross. We found out that Curtis Wright had told detectives that he'd stayed in bed all weekend that weekend, and Lebed had said to him, I don't believe you. And the initial interview was based on what was the murder carried out for, like, you know, like the life insurance, which when David Lebed is talking about this, he's calling it a theme, because when they were interviewing him, they were bringing up different themes, and killing Teresa to get the life insurance money was one of those themes. And then the polygraph testing was brought up again, and Lebed said that he'd mentioned the polygraph test because he did think Wright was lying. And the next interview was when he had been arrested, and Lebed spoke about the theory of being paid $10,000, and then about marital problems between Teresa and Mark, which Wright had agreed with but had disagreed with previously. So he'd obviously been asked about if there'd been marital problems between Mark and Teresa, and he must have said no. And then next time he was asked, he said there were. And then Wright had told Lebed that he hadn't been in Dr. Teresa's house, and Lebed again thought he was lying, but he didn't have the proof to say that he'd been in the house at the time. And the defence attorney brought up the part of the deal that Wright took was that he took a part of the plea deal that Wright took. He should have taken a polygraph test in that deal. Yet it's never been done. And I think the defence is really frustrated with that and can't understand why, if it was part of his deal, why he hasn't taken one. Which is fair enough. I mean, he's lied numerous times, and a man's life is on the line, and a polygraph test was never done. So I can understand why they're using that angle a lot. And then redirect. The information about the $10,000 Rogers was said to get for the murder came from Taylor. So it was Taylor that told detectives that Rogers had told her he was getting £10,000 for the murder. And then Lebed was asked, did he need a lie detector test to know Wright was lying? He said he didn't. Which is fair enough. Obviously, he's been in law enforcement a long time. But I think when a case like this is going to trial and it's a death penalty case, his word, although he's a long-serving detective, a polygraph test would have gave a lot more evidence, especially if Wright had failed it, because then his testimony could be thrown out and, you know, the Rogers trial could have gone very differently. And obviously this one could, because in all honesty, there's not much evidence against Max Sievers at the moment. Not that I can tell, although I do think he's guilty. The main witness, as it was in the Rogers trial, is Curtis Wright. And the defence is doing a damn good job of trying to prove he's just a liar. And then the recross from the defence, they asked him if he could, ask David Levitt if he could tell if more than one hammer was used. And he said, based on the evidence, he couldn't tell if more than one hammer was used. So that was the most interesting day this week. Day 5, there was witnesses, but it was all evidence that had been used in the Rogers trial and just going over the same things again. Jerry Lubinsky was who was in the Rogers trial. He was Curtis Wright's friend. Wright did odd jobs for him that Jerry would pay him for, and he was the one that loaned the Garmin sat-nav to Curtis Wright on his trip to Florida. He went to Wright's wedding and he met Mark at the wedding. So nothing really new there. The cross-examination. Now this was interesting because we found out in the Rogers trial that Wright met Jerry Lubinsky at the church. And we found out that the position that Wright held there, he had to resign from because a lot of parents were upset with some of the things he did. He took a group of children to see the homeless living on the streets, and a lot of parents didn't like that. And then again, the defence brought up the point of Curtis Wright having short-term memory problems. I mean, there's a lot to go against Curtis Wright. I can't see how he's credible at all. Like I've said, I do think Mark Sievers is guilty. But then you've got Curtis Wright, who's just constantly lied. Taylor Showmaker, who's not the most credible witness either. So, day 6, Suzanne Buchhofer. She's an analyst at Lee County Sheriff's Office. Again, it's the same testimony we've heard before, with the maps of where the cell phone pings were and the sat-nav data of where, you know, the route and everything. So yeah, there was nothing really new there, and that was it for day 6. And obviously it was Thanksgiving and the trial finished on Wednesday. That was day 6. They're off Thursday, Friday, and they're back on Monday. So I'm hoping that next week it starts to pick up a bit and we get a bit more information and it starts to get a bit more interesting. So yeah, look out for my new videos next week from when the trial picks up again. So until then, bye for now.